Australian coast.
The Namib Desert is one of the oldest and driest deserts in the world. Temperatures may soar to 40 degrees centigrade, and the wind blows for weeks on end. For every living creature, it's a struggle merely to survive here. Yet life has adapted to this ocean of sand. The animals that live here are often very strange. In 1984, Des and Jen Bartlett came here to photograph the desert wildlife. The Bartletts had filmed in the Australian bush, the African plains, and the snows of Canada, but they had never found anywhere as entrancing as the Namib Desert and the Skeleton Coast National Park. In order to explore these endless, shifting sands, the Bartletts took to the air. They soared on the desert winds like hawks, seeking out the creatures of the Namib below them. The Skeleton Coast stretches for hundreds of kilometers along Africa's southwestern shore. The cold Benguela current sweeps out of Antarctica and wells up here, bringing rich nutrients to this lonely coast. On the edge of the sea, life is varied and abundant. Thick fog, terrible winds, and treacherous currents have driven mariners onto this coast for centuries. The shore has become a vast graveyard of ships. The beach is littered with the wreckage of earlier voyages that never reached their destination. This place is called the Skeleton Coast because of the bones of ships and bones of sailors who escaped from the sea only to perish in the vast desert beyond. The remorseless wind is constantly moving and reshaping this eerie landscape. The sand itself seems alive. To escape predators, the searing heat and bitter cold at night, many creatures here live as much beneath the sand as on it. In this bizarre place, the weight of a passing lizard may trigger a barrage of strange sounds. No one can fully explain the so-called roaring dunes that hum and drone whenever sand slides down them. Sometimes they can be heard miles away. Perhaps because of its harshness, Des and Jen feel closer to nature here than anywhere else in the world. For many years now, they have learned to live in harmony with the Namib. To them, it is home.
Hold on tight. Not many marriages would survive if the man and the wife were spending 24 hours a day in their own company and going week on week, 2 or 3 months before they went out for supplies and met other people. So you must both have the same feeling, the same wonderment at nature and the area for it to work. And I think we both have the same feeling for it and the same determination or drive to find out what's happening and get it onto film or onto stills.
Until they came to the Skeleton Coast, the Bartletts had always been on the move. These tiny microlight planes are called drifters. They're only powered by a 2-stroke engine originally designed for a snowmobile. Amid the rolling dunes, some desert plants are miniature oases in themselves. The Nara bush, found only in the Namib, provides a shady nest site for Cape sparrows. They feed the nestlings on a protein-rich diet of insects that they catch in the open desert. As the new fruits swell at the base of the female flowers, they attract yellow-tailed ants. But the ants have another source of food permanently on tap. Each stem is covered by a cluster of black aphids. The ants herd them like dairy cattle and milk them by stroking them with their antennae. This stimulates the aphids to excrete a sugar solution, honeydew. Striped mice clamber into the branches to nip off the tender green shoots, but they're safer from predators on the ground. The sharp spines and horny outer shell of the Nara melon, a relative of the cucumber, make it too tough for the mice to break through, but once another animal, such as a jackal, has made a hole, they all try to grab a mouthful. The Nara bush provides them with all the food and moisture they need. Lizards emerge from the sand around mid-morning when the surface begins to warm up. After a few days, the opened Nara fruits are beginning to dry out, but the lizards still find nutritious seeds inside. These lizards are able to digest the seeds and don't play a part in the spread of new plants, unlike larger herbivores, which pass the seeds straight through the digestive tract, allowing them to germinate in their dung. Along the Skeleton Coast, the little moisture available usually comes in the form of fog. When warm air sweeps across the cold Benguela Current, fog may spread as far as 100 kilometers inland. A moist grey curtain descends over everything. Giraffes loom like ship's masts in the silent dawn. Many creatures have ingenious strategies for capturing the fog. This desert beetle climbs to the crest of a high dune and stands with its head downward. The fog condenses on the beetle's body and trickles down to its mouth, so it drinks water in this parched environment. The fog is the key to almost all life here. Spiders' webs are natural traps for moisture. Forming on tiny webs close to the ground, each droplet is a life-giving waterhole for thirsty ants. The fog spreads a clammy mist over everything and brings cold, cheerless mornings to Des and Jen's camp in the dunes. Although they have a cabin on the coast, they prefer to camp out in the desert. Almost 500 kilometers from the nearest town, they're alone for weeks at a time. Drought is the usual condition in the Namib Desert, but when rain finally comes, the storm is short-lived and violent. This green floodplain was created by the Huanib River. Normally dry, it's sometimes fed by torrential rains far inland that race through the desert towards the sea. This only happens once every few years, and this instant river may exist for only a few hours or days. But now, with the help of the planes, Des and Jen can film the encroaching floodwaters as they overwhelm the desert sand. They can fly ahead and catch the instant of immersion. Most desert wildlife benefits enormously from this new source of water. But for some, it's a little too much, too soon. Often a river disappears into the sand without reaching the sea, but this time the flood is powerful enough to break through the final barriers. For miles, the Skeleton Coast is transformed, a chocolate sea decorated with waves of white icing. Swiftly, the desert blooms. Long dormant seeds sprout and flowers appear. Withered plants spring to life and an army of insects comes out of nowhere to feed on them. These are the cones of one of the strangest plants in the world, the welwitschia. These bizarre dwarf trees can live for up to 2,000 years. They were probably growing here when Christ was born. Fields of grass spread across the desert, and the wind blows the seeds and chaff far into the dunes. In the lee of each desert dune, this detritus swirls and gathers. In their time here, the Bartletts have become well adapted to the desert, like the creatures they photograph, and one of them became their friend. They were given an orphan surrogate, a close relative of the mongoose. They called him Suri. Suri was a hyperactive companion, always hungry and digging in search of food. A white lady spider is no match for Suri. Another spider makes a miraculous escape. Out of sight is out of mind. These are the tracks of a lion, one of a small population, a dozen or so, that inhabited the Skeleton Coast when the Bartletts first came here. The tracks reveal that a large male passed their camp in the night. Once, one came within a meter of their sleeping bag. In search of the lions, the Bartletts often checked the beach near their cabin for tracks. The lions were attracted by carcasses washed up here, seals, seabirds, and even an occasional pilot whale. This is probably the only place in the world where you can see a lion feeding on a whale. Sometimes competing with jackals and other scavengers, these lions worked hard for a living. Further inland, their prey included ostrich, gemsbok, and giraffe. These desert lions were besieged, lonely fugitives trying to survive not only the harshness of the desert, but also the increasing encroachments of man. The Bartletts felt great sympathy for them. Even the king of beasts has to give way to an incoming tide. He vanished into the dunes. Des and Jen became experts at picking up the trail of the Skeleton Coast lions. The scattered feathers indicate that there has been an ostrich kill. Drag marks point the way to a rocky ridge where the lion has taken the carcass. The Bartletts feared for the life of this magnificent male. It would be easy for him to roam too far and leave the protection of the park. Hoping to keep track of the few remaining lions in the park, a nature conservator will tranquilize this one and fit him with a radio collar. The collar contains a tiny radio transmitter, so he can be located and tracked from a distance. When he awakens, the lion will be groggy, but none the worse for this experience. Soon after, the male was joined by a collared female. It was hoped that they would mate and have cubs. Following their prey, the lions were tracked and seen from time to time. They were still together. But outside the park boundaries, in the dry river valleys where the wild animals would naturally go, herdsmen eke out a living from this arid land. Their goats and cattle are easy prey for lions, and the people themselves and their children are vulnerable to attack, especially at night in their fragile shelters. When the lions were seen nearby, these people reacted predictably, and soon both the lions were dead. Des and Jen had known this lioness for more than 5 years, almost all her life. The male lion had been skinned and his hide hidden. Outside the park, it's legal to kill a lion if people or livestock are threatened. Trading in wildlife trophies without a permit is not. This conflict of interest is found across the globe. As more and more land is adopted for grazing and agriculture, it's increasingly likely that wild animals and people will meet, with tragic consequences. Within a few years, all the lions of the Skeleton Coast were dead. The beaches were no longer crisscrossed by their trails. At home in Mauvais Bay, the Bartletts took the news hard.
The worst moment for us was when we heard that the lioness and the male lion had been shot. And another sad part of that was that the lioness was carrying 4 cubs that would have been born within a month. The problem for the Skeleton Coast Park is it's too narrow a strip. It's not an environment in itself. The animals that are in it must go out of the protected area of the Skeleton Coast, and that's when they get killed. And so we'll just carry on, hopefully making people aware of it, trying to get funds to help conserve it. The people here, the conservationists, are doing a wonderful job, but all they need is the money to help them.
The tragedy of the lions would haunt them for a long time, but it only served to increase their resolve to protect the remaining desert wildlife, including the giants that have passed close to their camp and into the heart of the desert, the elusive elephants of the dunes.
There's a full-colour survival guide to all the programmes in the current series, containing information on the animals and habitats featured. If you'd like a copy, send a self-addressed label and cheque or postal order for £1.50, payable to Anglia Television, to Survival, Anglia Television, Norwich, NR1 3